Hi, my name is Geoff Huston. I'm the Chief Scientist at APNIC, the Asia Pacific Network Information Centre, and we do the numbers for the Asia Pacific area. Today I'm not going to talk about IP addresses and numbers. I'd like to talk instead about the Internet of Things and what it means for us. But to talk about that, I'd actually like to sort of take a little bit of a digression and actually talk about technology, because we've been, as humans, playing with technologies for literally millennia. And the question, I suppose, that I'd like to pose about the Internet of Things is this going to change us, or are these things just responding to our needs? In other words, was society always going to go down a certain path, and these devices and this technology is merely a convenience? Or is it more insidious? Is there some other replacement, some other subtle and fundamental change going on that's heralded the Internet of Things? Now, there are kind of two examples here that I think illustrate the spectrum of what's possible. And the first is the camel hair brush. Technology, certainly, quite old, 2,200 years ago. And it was invented by Ming Tian in China. And the reason why he invented it was that using reeds and various other forms of trying to impress writing on pieces of paper or whatever wasn't very good. It was slow, cumbersome, tedious, and prone to mistakes. The camel hair brush allowed folk to write down things, calligraphy, in much more faster ways, more convenient ways, and ways that were less error prone. In other words, calligraphy was always there. The camel hair brush just made it easier. So in this case, the technology didn't really change things, it just helped it along. But if you look at another technology, and the one that I'd actually like to think about is water. If you think about it, delivering drinkable, clean water with the convenience of a tap into everybody's house is an astonishing achievement. It takes a huge amount of technology. Lead, for the Romans, moved on to steel and chrome, so there's metallurgy, there's hydrology, there's building dams, there's large-scale earthworks, machinery. There's a huge amount of technology and infrastructure sitting behind that simple act of turning on a tap. And when we turn on the tap, we never even think about it. But without clean, potable water on demand, we couldn't have the cities we have today. We couldn't have the societies we have today, because we couldn't live in such large aggregated urban setups. So in some ways, the technology of water is a fundamental reason why the society of today is built the way it is, with such its heavy concentration on large-scale urbanisation. So I think in this case, the technology has changed us, and it wasn't merely a means to an end. This indeed had a fundamental impact. So what about computers and computing technology? I like this quote. I think it's really astonishing, because the smartphones are certainly snaps of information. You never look at a page on a smartphone for longer than a few seconds. And the observation is that the age of smartphones has left humans with such a short attention span that even a goldfish can hold a thought for longer. And this is a case of, well, is the phone changing us through changing our behaviours? Have we actually lost the ability to follow a thought for more than 10 seconds? And is this going to disappear completely in the coming generations? So who knows, but let's explore this a bit more. Because with the Internet of Things, I suppose the question is this just another fad? Is this just another piece of hype? And, the next piece of hype will come along and we'll forget about this one. Or is there something else going on that's really quite profound and that's going to echo through the centuries? Is adding silicon to almost every part of our lives and everything we do going to be such a fundamental change that we and our world and our society is going to get changed? And what will be the consequences if that's our future? Do you remember these? the place where you put your desktop computer. It had power, it had lighting, it had speakers, it had these screens, it had a very comfy chair. You know, it was a destination. It's like going to the shops. That visiting the internet was somewhere you went to. It wasn't something you put in your pocket. It was a destination. But what that iPhone did was completely think about the internet and computing in an entirely different way, as a convenience. Radio connectivity, it's always on. Tiny and light, your thumb can operate it. So it fits in your hands, it's got batteries, it's trivial, and it's convenient, just incredibly convenient. The internet's now anywhere and everywhere, and all of us use it that way. And so the mainframe is dead. The desktop, yeah, look at that pile of dead desktops, dead. I think even the laptop's going that way. It's probably going to die very, very soon. It's a pity because I like laptops, but I think it's going. Things are just replacing it. All kinds of things. Is this a current fad? Is this something that's happening now in 2017? Or has it been happening forever, for a long time? I like this. My mate Simon Hackett, who's actually an Australian, wired up a CD player into his workstation way back in 1990 and then did a demonstration of how to play music across the entire internet way, way back then, looking at the internet as merely a conduit for doing cool stuff. In this case, an internet radio. And in 1990, it was unique enough that it had its own cartoon. But it wasn't just sound and pictures. In ToasterNet in 1991, to demonstrate the awesome power of the Simple Network Management Protocol, John Romkey from Epilogue Technologies put a processor into a toaster and spent the entire time at one of the Interop shows making toast over the internet. And this is the commemorative t-shirt, which I kind of like. It's a cool t-shirt. The point I'm trying to make is, I suppose, that the internet and the Internet of Things is nothing new. So the idea that you had microprocessors and just embedded them into all kinds of places is as old as the Intel 4004 and the ubiquitous, at the time, Xilogic Z80, way, way back in the 1980s. And nothing much has changed. About the only difference, of course, is the chips are now phenomenal. This is a picture of the die of one of the latest Intel Pentium things. It evidently has close to 4 billion separate gates on the single chip. And in some ways it's still the same device. It's still a processor, it's still memory, but it's got a whole lot more gates on it. It goes a whole lot faster. It has a whole lot of stuff that gets offloaded, put in parallel, does this, does that. But it's still just a computer. And in some ways it's just the old thing with new chips. So in some ways, the Internet of Things is already with us. If you went out and bought a car today, it would be an astonishing car that didn't have at least 100 or even 200 microprocessor controlled systems. Keyless entry, windscreen wipers, engine control, all that stuff, the entertainment system, all has its own separate processing system. In fact, one of those self-driving cars, someone busted in through the entertainment system and was able to demonstrate in a hack that they could take over the car. The car itself is its own driven, networked environment, not just a single processor. Almost everything you buy now has microprocessor control. And of course, if you go into any industrial process, logistics, inventory control, environment monitors, almost everything has a processor behind it. So in some ways, the Internet of Things has been around for decades. Why is it so hot today? What's the difference about today? Well, certainly the hype is there. You know, the Internet of Things at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. Almost everyone who exhibits there now has Internet of Things going on. It's caught fire in a big way that you're not with it unless your dog is wearing a chip. You're not with it unless Lego has chips in it. You're not with it unless your home is fully connected to the internet and you and I can turn on and off the lights in your house. Whether you want me to do it or not, it's a different argument, but smart homes are with us. So the hype is there. But if you strip apart the hype, what is it? And I suppose it's very, very hard to pin down because there's such a massive variety of things out there. And the best we can talk about with things is this highly sort of generic term that, well, it's a thing and it's got a processor in it. So rather than try and do that, let's sort of ask a few questions and sort of look at why this is getting the hype today. Why is the Internet of Things a hot topic today and not a hot topic 10 years ago? This has been going on for a long time. One reason is the silicon industry can't stop itself. We make billions of chips every year. And now that we've stopped buying mainframes, we've stopped buying desktops, even the sales of laptops are now declining. And the smartphone market is getting saturated. But the silicon industry is still making billions a year. So what are you going to do with all these chips? Some form of consumption is necessary. So in some ways, excess production is looking for a consumer. The next part is the convenience of radio. We've done a huge amount of work with analog digital converters. And now these processors, these automated systems, are able to extract the bits out of what you and I would think of as meaningless garbled noise. All of a sudden, radio has been really effective. There's a huge amount. Every single credit card now has a little bit of chip in it, and those near field stuff where I just swipe my credit card near your sensor and money changes hands, which is fine if I'm in a shop, but when you and I are on the metro and you have a reader and I have a card, maybe I didn't want that. But you know, that's the world we're getting into. Passports, clothing tags, wireless earbuds, home controllers. It's now radio everywhere, all the time. And lastly, it's a case that the traditional folk who were in the mainstream computing are constantly looking for new markets. So these days, Amazon, Apple and Google are having a huge fight over the automated home, that all of a sudden it's a case of, well, will I have Google Assistant or the very, very, very svelte Alexa, or is Apple's HomePod going to do it for me in having the friendly digital assistant in my home that will answer all my questions? So all these traditional actors from the phone companies, ISPs and technology providers are trying to expand their market. And now that they've sold me one smartphone, two smartphones, four smartphones, I don't need any more. And so we're opening up new markets, whether it's your car, whether it's your home, whether it's your work, whether it's industrial processes, to fuel the ever-continuing fire and need for larger market space. So actors are also seeking new markets, driving this. Because as I said, the traditional computing industry has outgrown itself. Productions are now so large and the consumption in traditional computing is so small that excess production is looking for somewhere else. And somewhere else is smart. So if you add the word smart, then all of a sudden you've got a whole new lighting model. Change all your light bulbs. All your home appliances obviously need updating because the current ones you've got aren't smart. You need to wire up your household power to smart power management. And of course you've got smart labels in retail, smart traffic control. You name it, it can be smart. In fact, anything that uses the word smart, you can probably put a chip in it and it will, probably work. Who knows? So that leads us to this observation that the Internet of Things is extraordinarily diverse. So the things we're talking about need to work across millimetres to many kilometres. That some of these things generate a couple of bits, other things might even generate gigabits per second. And of course the data volumes might vary from a few number of bytes to an extraordinary amount of data. If your thing happens to be a telescope, then you're generating petabytes. If your thing happens to be a large-scale hadron collider, you're going to generate even more petabytes. So all of that is inside this sort of world of things. How we talk to these things, they might initiate it, they might push, or it might be passive. We might pull from it. We might wire the things up, or in fact it might just be ad hoc. The thing will try and talk whichever way it can. There's all kinds of variations here. So when we talk about a thing, we don't select from that menu. all of that menu is actually used. But maybe it's not that bad. There are some things in common. The world is now Unix, like it or not. It's small, it's ubiquitous, it's public domain, it's open source, whatever intellectual property rights are there, folk seem to understand it and are comfortable with it. Huge set of application libraries, and it works inside a small amount of memory. Compared to writing your own in a customized microkernel, which is risky, expensive, and quite frankly, rarely useful, the world now runs on Unix, which, good or bad, that's just the observation. The other observation is the world runs on IP. It doesn't run on any other networking protocol anymore because IP is small, it's ubiquitous, it scales, it's well understood, it's cheap, it's open. Everything that Unix is, IP is there as well. But I've really been talking about security, haven't I? And I suppose that's the biggest question and the biggest topic in this whole area, because the S in IoT is indeed for security. I saw that at the Nanog 69 and I love it. It's just such a great quote and so true. We don't understand what's going on. A friend of mine sent me this, that he reckoned he had 43 devices at home and he could only actually log into less than 10 of them. He actually doesn't know what they do. Some of them do excess access to third-party sites. He doesn't even know if some of them are spying on others. So inside his well-protected LAN, where he's got protection and encryption and at the edge, he has no idea if the devices that he's actually plugged into his LAN are friendly or foreign. And in some ways, he's not sure what's going on in his home network, because right now, he has no idea what he's got there. And that's not just him, it's me, it's you. What we're seeing is that these devices are made cheap. They're insanely stupid. They come with telnet ports open. The whole idea of DNS attacks are because the DNS resolvers sitting in CPE modems answer on the WAN side as much as the LAN side. Stupid mistakes. Open NTP, open SNMP, open ChargeN. So you can come in on the internet and just make it spew stuff back out again. Now, if it's 1 or 2 devices, that's fine. If it's 1 or 2 million, that's not fine. All of a sudden, these devices become toxic. And of course, if they're built using libraries, then all of a sudden you can do rootkit exploitation. All of a sudden, even though you think you're doing it right, if the libraries have got vulnerabilities, then you've got a problem. Not even Apple can produce an iOS version that hasn't been cracked sooner or later. And most of the time you jailbreak an iPhone, you break it through the libraries, because the libraries they use, standard Unix libraries, are susceptible to bugs. So these are not clever things. They're really stupid things. And sometimes they get exploited. So October last year, the Mirai botnet. They started with a list of just 62 insecure passwords and started looking for web cameras that used BusyBox. Why did the web camera use BusyBox? Because BusyBox is, if not free, incredibly cheap. But BusyBox is an old kernel, really, really old, and it's insecure. And out of the box, it comes with just 62 default passwords. So if you try them all, then all of a sudden you can turn that camera into an attack beast. You can own the box. So just using Telnet, up comes a 1 terabit per second attack, the largest attack we've ever seen. All because these webcams just used stupid software. So how do you stop it? And that's a really difficult question, because these aren't devices that have an army of worker bees paid to look after the mainframe. They sit in a cupboard. You've mounted them as a webcam on the wall. You don't log into them. So how do they get upgrades? How do you correct the bugs that are inevitably in their software? Who's going to do it? The manufacturer? The person who sold it? The library provider? Who's responsible when the supply chain is so astonishingly indirect? Who's liable is an equally good question. We have no answers for this. Folk just sell stuff, and stuff doesn't work after a while, and stuff gets broken, and broken stuff is used for attacks. And we can't fix it. So can we write better software? I wish we could, but maybe not. Because the other part of the Internet of Things is, this isn't $1 million camera. It's a $20 camera. It's a $5 camera. This is a price-sensitive market where robustness and quality doesn't really matter. The consumer buys not on the quality of software, the consumer buys on the quality of its operation fit for purpose, and robustness and security don't play. So they don't buy it for the quality of its security measures. They don't maintain it. So any old cheap stuff will sell. So all of a sudden you have these recipes for market failure, an industry that's massively excess production. The components are cheap, they're commodity components. The margins per sold product incredibly low. No one has an incentive to do the job well. That's market failure. How bad can it get? I like this one. This is Samsung's smart TV. TV has never been this smart, they claimed. So smart that it eavesdropped, that it had voice control, and when you used voice control, it recorded what it was hearing and sent it off to a third party to analyse that and try and figure out what you were saying. So you should never, ever have a private conversation in front of your Samsung smart TV. But it's not just these high-profile smart items. Oh no, it's teddy bears. This is one where you can send a message to your teddy bear and it will read it out to the child or replay it. That, as it says, when it has a message, its heart blinks and the message plays when you squeeze its paw. Great, huh? Well, maybe not, because all those private messages became public messages because the security model was broken. So we have a problem. We have a big problem. And some of these things are difficult. In a phenomenally diverse market where cheap dominates, where there's no standardization, where all these devices are mutually incompatible, where's it going to go? Will Google or Apple or Amazon take over everyone, and that a small number of providers and proprietary architectures dominate the entire world of the Internet of Things and indeed our world? Will we ever get round to V6? Will this market ever take account of quality and robustness? And will we ever get security under control? I'm not sure there are answers to that. I'm like, some of those things are just hidden in the mist of the near future. We can't tell. But some things you can tell right now. There are more things than conventional computers on the internet. Absolutely. And about 30, 40, 50 years of experience have said, we cannot build comprehensive security models. That's a problem. We're too willing to trade privacy for convenience. And so now privacy no longer exists in terms of personal concepts. A lot of companies know precisely what we're doing even before we think of it ourselves. But worse is that the digital pollution level is right up there. That the internet today is largely chaotic, but more to the point, it's hostile and it's toxic. That you put out a device that doesn't bristle with defences, it will be overtaken. It will be taken over, it will be coerced, it will become part of some kind of botnet quickly. So all of a sudden now, the internet is no longer that friendly, happy place. It's quite a disgustingly toxic and extremely hostile environment. And there's one more thing we can count on. Whatever we see today is going to be worse tomorrow. It's not going to get better because we don't understand how we can make it better. The Economist in April said, well, technology itself can't improve itself. If we're going to do anything to improve this, we need to look at economics and markets. We need to address the problem as a market failure rather than as a technology failure. And Schneier says, Bruce Schneier, who writes the well-known blog on security, says, hang on a second, if you think a market's going to help you, you're wrong. There is no market solution because insecurity is an externality that nobody cares about. This pollution, this digital pollution, is invisible. And so no one's incented to fix it. So is this almost like climate change? That we know there's a problem, but we don't know how to stop it. That what's going on is we're being overrun by these devices that are eminently coercible. They're not strong enough to withstand the toxic pressure. We can't improve their quality. We can't keep on building ever larger barriers against denial of service. We can't even turn to the law and regulation because we can't regulate the behaviours of this equipment and their vendors in a massive global market. We're powerless. So if someone says, oh, the Internet of Things, it's great, then my question is, well, considering how bad it is, why do you think it's going to get any better than today? What's going to make it better? I don't think it will. And that to me is, I suppose, a very disturbing answer, because the world of the Internet of Things is not a very friendly or happy world. It's quite a bleak world and quite a threatening one. We just have too much stuff and we can't manage it. And that's a problem. I'd like to answer questions, but unfortunately I'm not there with you. So I hope this was entertaining and amusing, if not a little bit disturbing at the same time. And when next you write some code, think hard about the environment where that code might have to live in, and make sure you think about security and you think about how to write defensive code that's a whole lot better than what we're managing today. Thank you.